Now what I'm going to do is strap down your arms to avoid any excessive movement on your part during the experiment. Is that too tight? Okay. This electrode is connected to the shock generator in the next room. And this electrode paste is to provide a good contact to avoid any blister or burn.
Well, now I get a shock of 75 volts. He kind of did some yelling in there. 75 volts, Jim. You don't know.
Please continue.
This will be at 3:30. Just how far can you go in this thing?
As far as is necessary.
I can't stand the pain. Help me out of here.
Can't stand it. I'm not going to kill that man. There. You hear him hollering?
As I said before, the shocks may be painful, but they're not dangerous.
They're hollering. He can't stand it. What if something happens to him?
The experiment requires that you continue, teacher.
Yeah, but I'm not going to get that man sick in there. I mean, he's hollering in there. I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
285 volts.
Continue, please.
That place turned me into a monster. I was very angry. You know, just being in Abu Ghraib, you know, it changed your whole mind frame. You know, you can go from being a docile, jolly guy, and you go to Abu Ghraib for a few, just being in Iraq for a while, you become, a robot.
It was a door that I was afraid to walk through. If you walk through it, at which point do you say it's enough? What's cruel enough? How do you go back from that? And I was afraid that I just wouldn't come back, that I would just get lost.
Something in your brain clicks that everything you see is normal. I mean, you'll go crazy if you don't adapt to what you're seeing. You gotta block it out. You gotta do something to make your day go by without going crazy.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world. And we stand together to win the war against terrorism.
I was in Algebra 2 class. And it was just a regular day. We were sitting down waiting for class. And then there was an announcement. It was brought into real retrospect when my friend Chris, he leaned over and he's like, "Hey, aren't you in the reserves?" And I thought, yes, I am. I am in the reserves. How is this gonna affect me?
The ultimate reason I joined was to be a part of the effort to make the country a safer place. I wanted to help protect our country so that people that wanted to come in and attack us wouldn't have that opportunity again.
It made me feel like we have to do something. It made me feel like, someone has to pay. It's like we can't let 2 buildings get blown up and not do anything about it.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. And we will do whatever it takes to smoke them out and get them running, and we'll get them.
The Geneva Convention's question doesn't really come up until the war in Afghanistan starts and people start to come into the custody of our forces there. And so the Defense Department wants to know, what is the status of the people we're catching, the al-Qaeda and Taliban fighters?
The 4 current Geneva Conventions were adopted in 1949, and they represent the standards against which all nations and all combating forces will be judged. They are binding international law, and they represent a humanitarian and human rights standard for the world. They're important because U.S. military has been frequently engaged in combat. American forces are always at risk of being captured, and the Geneva Conventions protect American soldiers from ill treatment in the event of capture.
After the American Civil War and up until the Second World War, the United States was consistently known for observing standards that were in fact higher than the Geneva Convention standards, and consistently advocating that all countries should operate to a level above the Geneva Convention standards.
At the Justice Department, we did not think the Geneva Conventions applied in the war against al-Qaeda because they did not sign the Geneva Conventions and they don't follow any of the rules of warfare. Al-Qaeda, if you look at what happened on 9/11, has no interest in following any of those rules. They deliberately kill civilians, they deliberately target civilians, they disguise themselves as civilians. They don't take prisoners, as far as we can tell. Instead, they try to kidnap people and execute them on the web or on television.
Officials in the White House and particularly in the Department of Justice said Geneva Convention shouldn't hold sway, and that point of view finally triumphed. The president made the decision early in 2002 that Geneva Conventions would not hold, and this was unprecedented in American history. It never happened before.
The war is a terrible thing, and it's always right on the edge of falling apart. Of awful things happening. And the only way, sort of ironically, the only way to conduct a war in a civilized manner is to ensure that everybody understands what the rules are to the maximum extent possible. And when you start messing around with those rules, when you say they don't apply, they're all terrorists, so different rules apply, now you're in unlimited warfare.
They'll be handled not as prisoners of war, because they're not, but as unlawful combatants. As I understand it, technically, unlawful combatants do not have any rights under the Geneva Convention.
This war was a war that was going to depend first and foremost on intelligence, that is, on information derived from prisoners of war. Therefore, rules regarding interrogation, what you could and couldn't do to prisoners, were absolutely central to fighting this new war. The Department of Justice built a theory that essentially would render moot, render powerless, the various undertakings that the United States had signed on to that prohibited torture. The most obvious one is the Convention Against Torture.
The statute does not define many of the terms that it uses. It doesn't say what severe means, for example. It doesn't really contain any definition of physical pain or suffering. So our job was try to figure out what did that statute actually mean, because the words are ambiguous, vague, and had not been interpreted before. Our office eventually issued a memo in August of 2002 to the White House. Physical pain amounting to torture must be equivalent in intensity to the pain accompanying serious physical injury, such as organ failure, impairment of bodily function, or even death.
The heart of this argument is to redefine torture so it is so narrowly conceived, it essentially allows very, very severe interrogation that cannot be construed to be torture.
What this memo articulates is the view that torture is prohibited, but torture is defined very, very narrowly to consist almost of imminent death or loss of bodily organ or function. A definition of torture that was later criticized by another observer as the kind of definition that probably would have justified most of what Saddam Hussein was doing in his prisons as not being torture.
I can remember sitting in my office and I'm reading some of these memos. It was stunning. It literally took my breath away. I couldn't believe that I was reading this and that it hadn't been shredded and burned and buried as the wild imaginations of some lowly lawyer in the bowels of justice that should never see the light of day. But now suddenly it's become U.S. policy.
Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. The terrorist threat to America and the world will be diminished the moment that Saddam Hussein is disarmed.
And we believe he has, in fact, reconstituted nuclear weapons.
There's no doubt in my mind that he has weapons, chemical and biological weapons, and has been working on nuclear weapons.
When I first got into Iraq, we saw, all the blown up tanks, they were bombed from the sky. Bullet holes everywhere. It was like going into a Mad Max movie, like Mad Max Return to Thunderdome. Like, wow, I'm at war. Like, wow. We're just like, part of you were like, this is cool. And then the other part of you was like, damn, well, we gotta do this. But someone gotta pay.
I remember as we left Kuwait, I volunteered to be a gunner. It was a 12-hour ride. And I said, I'll gun. I'm new here. Just tell me what I'm looking for, and I'll gun all day on this whole convoy. And I said, but the only thing I need to know is the rules of engagement. And they all kind of look at me. I'm like, I need our rules of engagement. I've never been in a combat zone before. And they said, well, if it looks like the enemy, shoot it. I'm like, no, I'm serious now. If I need rules of engagement, what constitutes the enemy, whatever. We just told you, Sergeant. If it looks like the enemy, shoot it. And I looked at him, I said, I've really never been outside the United States. Everything looks like the enemy to me out here.
Are we leaving the other one? Just take it for us.
Units in Iraq are picking up people on hunches and suspicions. For instance, you'll get an intelligence report that someone driving a black Opel, which is a model of car over there, was involved in an IED attack. So they'll just round up people with black Opels and bring them in for interrogation. Any kind of hunch that these units had, they would act on it and arrest people. They just arrested everyone.
وباب تنفتح علينا باب البيت نضربه ضربة قوية وطلعنا نشوف شكل من الأمريكان داخل البيت كلهم بنات دخلوا علينا اطلعوا برا طلعونا كليتنا برا احنا الأطفال والنساء واحنا الرجال عزوا النساء والأطفال على صفحة واحنا رجال على صفحة وهاي ب9 بالليل تقريبا شلون جو بارد فالأطفال قاموا يبكون من الخوف الرعب مال الدخول علينا وياهم تكرم كلاب إضافة إلى الأغراض اللي كسروها والأغراض اللي انباقت من البيت ذهب وفلوس فطلعونا أني وأبوي الله يرحمه وعمي وولد عمي خذونا طلعونا برا وهذا ضربونا دي ورا وهذا الواير مشونا سرا بالشارع قعدونا بالشارع هاي أول بدايته يعني أول بداية
heard that over 30,000 people were executed over there during Saddam's regime. That they were buried right there, most of them were. And just very horrible stories about prisoner tortures. Of course, there were pictures of Saddam all over the prison. The place was horrible. There were wild dogs running around, digging up human bodies.
It was a place inside the prison, like the death chamber that we called it, where it was 2 holes in the floor and the hanging hooks. You know, said they hung people every day. They'd hang like 80, 100 people a day or something like that. Where we lived at in our barracks, it was 2 ovens in there that we, what do you call it, an incinerator for bodies. That was kind of like, okay, whoa, where are we living at? You know how many lost souls or displaced souls are walking around here?
It was very, very hot. The heat index, direct sunlight, was 130. And the odor was, I'll never forget the smell of Abu Ghraib. The smell of sweat and trash and feces and urine wafting through the air. It's just, I will never forget the smell of Abu Ghraib.
Just a desert bowl of misery is the only way to describe it.
And the place was just so dark, you know, and you knew the history. And I mean, like, you felt like it was a haunted place. You know, like at nighttime, there's certain hallways you wouldn't want to go down by yourself because, you know, you're, you know, afraid there might be a ghost or something, and you knew if something was there, it was, you know, really pissed off. It was just the most surreal place, you know, you can imagine. It's like a combination of Apocalypse Now meets The Shining. Except that, you know, this is real and you're in the middle of it.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
We got fucking at least 3 missiles here.
We requested resources and assistance many times, almost on a daily basis, at some points practically pleading for resources, not only for Abu Ghraib, but for all of the other prison facilities we were trying to restore and reopen. Somebody had this crazy idea that they could restore all of the prison systems and get the new Iraqi guards retrained in the right way to do an appropriate prison operation in 90 days or less. There was no plan for anything.
We get there and we're told, okay, put your weapons away, put your trucks away and park them. You're not going to need them any longer. We're like, what are you talking about? Where these people that were there, you know, said, okay, no, you're going to be prison guards. You're going to augment the guard force inside. So our commander was like, hey, what are we doing? We're not corrections. I was like, our guys never been trained to do anything like that. So hence, we put our weapons away, our tons of ammunition away, and then we became prison guards with no training whatsoever.
And we all look at each other, what? We, the 72nd MP company is leaving, and we're going to take their place. If there was ever a turn in morale, it was right there that I could see. Everything just hit rock bottom.
Abu Ghraib turned out to be the most attacked U.S. position in Iraq, meaning that they got shelled every day, shot at every day, every single day, all day, every day.
And there was holes in one of the walls from shrapnel that a mortar had just hit. I think it was maybe a week before we came or a couple days before we came. And he was telling us how the guy was praying and a mortar hit and killed a bunch of prisoners. So, I mean, you definitely didn't feel safe being there.
The road outside the prison is the most dangerous road on the planet Earth. You have more fatalities on that road, more IEDs on that road, more shots fired on that road than any road in the world. You could be walking to your barracks, boom. Oh man, incoming, incoming. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Yep.
Which way to go? Honestly don't know. Flow brings dough, dough makes foes. Froze in my clothes, my mom won't close. Below every row where my mind is a basement. Do I actually have a choice on my placement? Do I really have a voice for my displacement? Am I in the front, running with my face wet? Or am I in the back, wondering where the race went? Don't wanna face it, feel like I'm a space kid. Lost beyond time is a hard way to live. All they do is take, all I do is give. I'm so fucking tired of living in this pattern. Does everybody on earth also live in Saturn? Am I the one that's crazy? People's minds seem lazy. Way God made me, I'm thinking they can't face it.
That's right. Abu Ghetto. Oh, Ghetto Abu.
Oh, you don't want to say it? You don't want to say it?
In July and August, the prison population was fairly stable, and I would say at the highest numbers, it was still less than 1,000. By the end of September, it went to over 6,000. We had just short of 300 military police personnel at Abu Ghraib to guard thousands of prisoners.
You had the general population prisoners, which were basically a huge mass of humanity, thrown into a mud pit, surrounded by concertina wire. And then you had the hard sites, which is where the intel holds were at, as well as the insane or the criminal. And then there was an even more, the most secure section was where they had the women and the children.
The females that we had were, the spouses or sisters or cousin of high-value detainees that were being used as, like, okay, well, we have your sister, we have your wife, you need to turn yourself in. Same thing with the little children. And we had like 9-year-olds in there. I'm like, why do I have a 9-year-old in a prison? It's crazy. But yeah, that's what was there.
I was chosen to work at the hard site because I'm a female, and they needed females working 1B. And that's mainly where they stuck me when Megan Ambule wasn't working.
In the hard site, there was probably 6 or 7 guards guarding, I would say, at least 1,000 detainees, if not more. And you had all those, if all those prisoners got to coordinating that at one time, the guards that were inside of the compound would have been dead. It was such a scary situation to live under.
The prisoners in the hard site were like the lowest scum on the earth, the Al-Qaeda's, the Taliban, Saddam Hussein, Fadayin, Wahhabis, just all terrorist bad guys. And they were American killers.
We were told that these detainees were the worst of the worst, and this information that we needed to get was going to save lives. It was going to have, somebody said at one point, it was going to have global implications.
I think the military intelligence personnel were caught pretty much by surprise at this number of prisoners being brought in that had to undergo an interview at least, or interrogations. Their assessment within the first couple of weeks was, ma'am, most of them are just guilty of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. They don't have any information. Well, according to them at that time, it was about 75 to 80%. of the people being brought in really didn't have any information of value or any information at all about terrorism.
The interrogators that I worked with at Abu Ghraib were all extremely frustrated by the lack of intelligence that they were getting during interrogations. And most of them attributed that to the fact that they had prisoners who didn't have intelligence to give them. The interrogators who were in my unit spent all year there, and they were telling me that they got nothing.
أنا ما أعرف ليش مسجون. جابوني بقوني 7 أشهر أنا وأولادي وما أعرف ليش مسجون. شنو التهمة مالتي؟ قالوا لي أنت تسوي متفجرات وتسوي عبوات ناسفة. وخلاص بعد ما أعرف. شنو اللي الدليل اللي والمستمسك اللي عليه؟ ماكو. مجرد وشاية أحد المواطنين قال لهم هالشكل.
In the summer of 2003, the insurgency grew at a very rapid rate. You had the bombing of the UN headquarters in August, the bombing of the Jordanian embassy, the bombing of the Turkish embassy, and then at the end of October, the attack on the Rashid Hotel, where most American workers in the Green Zone were housed.
Thanks to the United States of America, 50 million people once lived under tyranny, and today they live in freedom.
The American military had no idea who these people were. How do we fight an enemy we cannot see? The only way to do that is to interrogate enough people that we will get usable intelligence that will allow us to nip the insurgency in the bud. And I think there was a degree of panic about the lack of intelligence and the lack of knowledge about the insurgency.
Rumsfeld was openly irritated about it. And then we come to accounts in the summer of 2003 of an intelligence briefing that occurred at the Pentagon involving Rumsfeld, Cambone, a handful of other senior officers. And he's described as being openly angry, pounding his fist on the table, and asking in a taunting way, why is it that Guantanamo gets me good intel, just what I want, and I don't get this out of Iraq? I've had it with this. I want you to get Miller out to Iraq and Gitmoize the situation and do it fast.
And Miller, by all accounts, is a man who is, in a way, Rumsfeld's kind of officer, which is to say he doesn't care about past practice, he doesn't care about tradition necessarily. What he cares about is getting results. And he established a system in Guantanamo that was based entirely around getting information from these detainees, which is to say, using harsher interrogation techniques.
We detain the enemy combatants here at JTF Guantanamo in a humane manner. Everything that we do inside Camp Delta, America can be proud of.
I am telling you what I believe in every inch of my body to be the truth. And I have spent a lot of time on secure video with the people down there. I have talked to people who've been down there and come back, and I haven't found a single scrap of any kind of information that suggests that anyone has been treated anything other than humanely, notwithstanding everything we have read and heard.
At the time, there were rumors coming out of Guantanamo that prisoners were being abused. Certainly, certain of the human rights organizations had detected those kinds of rumors and written letters to the administration urging the administration not to engage in this kind of practice. So I think word was starting to leak out as to something occurring in Guantanamo.
General Miller at Guantanamo turned Guantanamo from a conventional U.S. military prison that would abide by the laws of war into a kind of ad hoc behavioral laboratory for the introduction, the use of extreme techniques.
A lot of what we know about what went on in the cells during interrogations at Guantanamo, we know from FBI officers who went down and were working at Guantanamo and, in essence, observing what the Army interrogators were doing. We have a number of emails and reports that have been declassified by these FBI people, counterterrorism officials who reported on what they saw. On the couple of occasions, he writes, I entered interview rooms to find a detainee chained hand and foot in a fetal position on the floor with no chair, food, or water. Most times they had urinated or defecated on themselves and had been left there for 18 to 24 hours or more. These practices, when you see them on bureaucratic documents, seem absolutely inoffensive, almost benign. And this report is one of many, many we have from Guantanamo, simply reporting on the flesh and blood reality of what those bureaucratic sounding names mean.
Donald Rumsfeld approved a memo in response to pressures from interrogators in December of 2002, in which he approved all sorts of enhanced interrogation techniques. What he allows is solitary confinement, noise, light, dark, in other words, enhanced or extreme sensory disorientation.
They include stress positions, and they include a series of techniques designed to undermine the self-confidence of the detainee. And subsequently, we learned that this includes sexual humiliation techniques, enforced nudity.
What is most significant is that in it, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, in his own name, approves the harshest interrogation techniques that have been approved in the history of our country. On the final copy of this so-called action memo, you see after Rumsfeld approves certain of these practices, including forced standing, he writes at the bottom, however, I stand for 8 to 10 hours a day. Why is standing limited to 4 hours? DR, Don Rumsfeld.
This handwritten comment by Secretary Rumsfeld could be considered like a wink in the nod to the interrogators, suggesting that, never mind the actual limitations contained in the memorandum, do what you have to do to get the information requested.
General Miller is sent to Iraq to help them get more actionable intelligence from these thousands of security detainees. And General Miller, without hesitation, said, look, it's my opinion you are treating the prisoners too well. They don't know who's in charge. And if you don't treat the prisoners like dogs, you have effectively lost control of the interrogation.
At the close of General Miller's visit, Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez, overall commander of U.S. forces for Iraq, issued a memorandum for extreme techniques that can be seen to be in violation of both U.S. and international law.
I believe they thought they were interpreting the Geneva Conventions and applying them. I don't think they thought, well, the Geneva Conventions don't apply. And so I think what they thought they were doing was following those standards and trying to create interrogation methods based on them.
There were so many changes in policies on what kind of stress positions you can use for how long and stuff of that nature. It was kind of confusing.
It was never clear to me what was allowed and what wasn't allowed in Iraq. No one ever could make anything clear to me. When the questions were asked, it was like, hey, I don't know. No one could answer questions for us.
All I remember is the first day I worked at the heart site, and that was October 18th, I believe, because I wrote a letter home. And all I knew was there was an interrogation going on, and there was a prisoner nicknamed Taxi Cab Driver who was handcuffed to a window backwards, naked, in one of the cells. and there was an interrogator there. I just left it alone. I rode back home saying I didn't agree with it, and I went to work the next day.
What's going on with the nakedness? It's like, why are these people naked? You know, I've never seen anything like that before in my life. You know, naked prisoners with panties on their heads and in compromising positions, you know, locked up. So what's going on with that? I didn't understand that.
I got in there and there's this naked kid who's old enough to be my younger sibling, you know, just naked, just hiding his shame with his hand, trying to answer these questions. And no one raised any objection or any concern. It was just business. And our business by the detainees was sometimes conducted naked.
The nudity and the shackling of the prisoners was everyday occurrence. The prisoners that came in had to be strip searched no matter what, just as a security. Usually they came in with a sandbag on their head because their handler didn't want anybody to know they were there or didn't want them to see anybody else who was there. So they stood around naked with a sandbag on their head, standing on a box or holding something, not knowing where they were or what was going on.
نعم غالبا أول 4 أو 5 أيام يبقى المعتقل عاري تماما.
بقيت 25 يوم مصلخ بس باللباس بالمحجر بدون أي لا فراش ولا بطانية ولا شرشف ولا كل شيء ولا تكرم حتى نعال يعني ما عندي.
هو المحققين يأمرون اللي مثلا احنا نحس من يعرضونا للتعذيب انه عندك ثاني يوم تحقيق. يعني كأنه يهيئونك للتحقيق. هو بالحقيقة احنا نظن انه اللي يؤمر بالتعذيب هو نفس المحقق.
We know that after General Miller's visit to Abu Ghraib prison and to Iraq in August, September 2003, that the MPs were removed from the control of General Janis Karpinski, who was the commander of military police for Iraq, and placed under the control of military intelligence. The MPs were then no longer part of, if you will, the kind of incarceration staff. They were moved to be a part of the interrogation staff. So the MPs had the job of softening up, creating the conditions for effective interrogation by the military interrogators.
What happened when we got to Abu Ghraib is military intelligence was placed in charge of us. MI and OGA, who is CIA, and all these other corporations, these civilian contractors that didn't answer to anyone like us, would come in and tell our MPs, this guy needs to have a bad night. What kind of bad night? Use your imagination. You can do this, stress positions, loud music, do whatever you want to do to them. Just make sure they don't sleep. We need that information.
The MI people, the specific handlers, would have me give whichever detainee lots of showers during the day. Like, they would say, this guy's really dirty. We want you to give him lots of showers. We want you to stand in there and point and laugh at him. And, you know, just be there while so he's definitely aware that I'm standing there while he's fully nude.
Like, hey, Sergeant Davis, take these numbers down. Prisoner number 111777 or something like that. He needs to be up at 4 o'clock in the morning, go to bed at 4:30, be up at, 5:15, go to bed at 7 o'clock. This prisoner number, blah, 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 do this, do that. Take the radio and put the megaphone up to it and keep them up all night long. Bang the garbage can, slam the doors. If they go to sleep, throw water on them like that. Keep them awake. Make sure their life is hell tonight.
It's far more difficult to cure the victims of psychological torture than it is to cure those who suffered physical torture. If we call psychological torture in this country torture light, okay? It's not torture light. It's the most damaging, the most destructive.
Sergeant Grainer, he was sent for specifically to work the night shift because, as he was told, because of his civilian prisons experience. And they needed somebody with that kind of experience.
Tier 1 had just myself and Grainer at the time. There was only two of us, as far as military police, that were assigned to the tier on a 12-hour shift.
Early on in October, Grainer was hoarse. He had a real raspy voice. And I said, "What's the matter? Grainer, you sick?" He goes, "No." He says, "I'm having to yell at detainees." And I said, "Oh, really?" He goes, "I have a question for you." He said, "MI and OGA are making me do things I feel are morally and ethically wrong. What should I do?" And I looked at him and I said, "Don't do it." He goes, "I don't have a choice."
هو كل الأمور بيد المحقق، يعني ما يجري شيء غير ما يريد المحقق، بدليل يعني ذول الاثنين المدنيين اللي هو أمر جارنر أنه يعلقني بالسلسلة، يعني مسألة التعذيب أمامه.
Get a little bit of power? You know what, this feels pretty good actually. You get a little bit more power? Wait a minute, I need more. I'm addicted to this power, and it just starts building and building, and I believe that's what Grainer had. He got free reins from people and got all this power, and you're not going to turn the reins back over. It becomes who you are. It becomes what you're known for.
كان غارنر مع رفاقه بعد 1 أو 2 ليلا يأتي ب4 أو 5 ويبدأون بتعذيب المعتقلين وكأنهم يقيمون حفلة. كان يتقن فن التعليق، يعلق من اليدين بزوايا لا يكاد الشخص أن يتحملها لمدة 5 دقائق. يبدأ يصرخ، فكان يعلق 5 أو 6 بأشكال مختلفة، وبعد نصف ساعة أو ساعة كانوا يصرخون جميعا، فكان يتمشى ويقول: الآن بدأت الموسيقى التي أريدها وأريد أن أسمعها.
أو يسمعنا أصوات غريبة بالحاكي أو سماعة ما يخلينا ننام نهائيا، يعني يوميا، أو يطلع 2 أو 3 يعني، أو 2 أو 1 يعذبه يخليه يصرخ للصبح. هاي معدل يومي، يعني 50 يوم نهائيا ما كنوا بس جوع وأذية وتعب.
هذا أخوي الأكبر. هذا كانوا يأتون بي عاري، ولأنه هاي قلت لك هاي إيده معرضة للإصابة، فكان يحملونه مي ويأمرونه بالركض بالزنزانة حتى، ويأمروني أني أنظر إلها، ويقولوا لي إما أن تعترف بالتهم الموجهة أو راح نأتي بأمك ونفعل بها هكذا. نعم، هذا أخي الأكبر.
I didn't feel like it was my place to question anything, as I just got out of basic, and that wasn't. It was like, if you question your orders, you and your battle buddy are gonna die.
We're at war. War's not pretty. War's not nice. These guys kill people. Oh well. After a while, you become numb. You just zone it out. Everyone did.
You started to forget what you saw the day before, and because the next day would always usually be worse. So you kind of went numb the day before, and then it just kept going. It was like a cycle.
It just became something that you had to gear yourself up to do that. I guess I always, if something I had to do, if I didn't like to do it, I always, like going to the dentist, I didn't care about it, but I always went and did it, even though it was uncomfortable.
Just blew my mind how it was normal. There was just no big deal. It was just like a day at work to say, okay, we're going to do this to this guy, we're going to do that to that guy. And I'm sitting there saying to myself, my God, what is happening to this place?
part of this that we don't understand is the powerful appeal and enormous destructiveness of torture. Why, when you give an order, and you give a signal for a little bit of torture, why it spreads like wildfire. There is no such thing as a little bit of torture.
When I had that riot, that just set everybody off, including myself. We were just like, that's it, it's the last straw. They gathered up the rioters, so we got them down to 1A, 1AB. The soldiers threw his person on the floor. Then another soldier threw their person on the floor. And then I threw my person I was escorting on the floor. That I was angry, upset. I wonder, like, why would you want to attack us? I know you're upset. We're upset too. So I took my aggression out because, hey, well, it's been okay this whole time.
I wrote the word rapist on one of them because his face sheet said he was a rapist, which was common practice to write on prisoners, just writing it on them. I don't even know why, but I just wrote it on him.
I saw the one detainee in the simulated fellatio. At that point, Frederick took the sandbag off the head of the one and pointed at us to show him that there was females watching.
To my knowledge, those guys were going to be interrogated to get information about the riot starting, about what was going on, what was going next. So that led me to be like, okay, these guys are getting ready to get interrogated, so I can help now. But I stepped on the toe of one of the detainees. My dad stepped on the hand of one of the detainees, and I yelled at him like that, and I leaned on him with my body weight, like I fell on the pile. When I fell on the pile, I was yelling at him.
They were stripped one by one and then stuck into a pyramid. If I saw something, I took a photo of it. The first thing I think of is take photos. That probably sounds really sick, but I'm always taking photos. I mean, that's just me. I've always taken photos. I was taking a photo from behind, and Sergeant Frederick said, hey, get in the photo, or let's take a photo or something to that effect. And Grainer was behind me, and I just gave a thumbs up and smiled. I realized it was a pretty stupid thing to do right away, but it happened.
I don't think it's necessarily true that someone said, put those people in a pyramid, a naked pyramid. But they're part of a larger universe of other acts. Because there was significant sadism, and there was significant indiscipline, there was significant abuse. The problem is all of it took place because of an overwhelming or an overarching doctrinal permissive environment that allowed you to also beat people up and also keep them awake and also subject them to stress positions that have been approved in effect by the Secretary of Defense and by the theater commander, Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez.
There was a soldier with a sort of speaker box, and he was shouting things into this room. Hey, what are you guys doing in there? Are you guys fucking in there? What are you, faggots? Out come these 3 naked, petrified Iraqi men.
I go ahead and go in, and Grainer tells me they're interrogating these guys or whatever. Then they're handcuffing them together, and the entire time they're yelling, confess, you know you did it, confess. So I'm thinking, okay, what's going on here?
They were asked to get down on their stomachs, and Remember, they're completely naked. They're asked to get down their stomachs and to crawl on the floor. Specialist Grainer was shouting, "That's not good enough. Go down far enough to where your genitals are scraping on the floor."
نعم أنا شفت بعيني يعني قدامي أكو صور بها 3 ومكلبشيهم كل من يعني يده ويا يد الأخ.
And they were made to crawl on their stomachs from that door to the end of the hall and back.
فصلخهم كلهم وكلبتهم قام يسحل بيهم بالممر. هاي من العصر تقريبا، من الليل بداية الليل لحد الصبح تعذيب واحنا بدون نوم. وبالاخر قام يجيبهم ويفررهم بالممر الفوق والجوا واحد واحد.
At that time, I can't say that I was sympathetic to the detainees because of what they've done. I was also outraged. I was extremely pissed off at them for what they've done. But at first, I stood to the side.
And there was Specialist Kroll. I remember that with the water. He had a cup of water, and he was motioning with his finger to roll, and he was pouring water onto a detainee.
Then somehow a football, a Nerf toy, came out. I don't know. I think one of the MPs brought it out. So this football was thrown around from a main MP to MI, and I also threw it, and I hit a detainee in the leg with a Nerf ball.
They arranged the detainees into a position to where they were mimicking having sex. You know, they were shouting, they were crying, and there was just a lot of pleas, a lot of Allahs, and you know, and please, Mr. Please, please, please.
كانوا بوقتها هم يصرخون صراخ يعني الله أكبر ويعيطون ويبكون ومستر بليس هم يتوسلون بالأمريكيين.
The pressure was constantly building up, and when I saw these detainees and learned what they've done, I just kind of snapped.
تعبنا كلش بس يعني ما بيدينا شيء، احنا بنصمح جرومك بس نسكت، نتألم ونبكي ونسكت.
There's no way that I can just sit here and condone what's going on. So then the next day we get up early, we run missions, I come back, and then I report it to my lieutenant the following day, that day. And just told him, hey, military intelligence is over at the hard site doing some pretty weird things with naked detainees. He goes, what? I said, they're interrogating naked detainees. And he goes, you're not even supposed to be over there. And I'm thinking, what? I don't, you know, and it's all these meltdown things that go through your brain like, no, you're not getting what I'm saying here. He goes, that's not even your job over there. You need to stay away from the hard side. Not too long, about 2-3 weeks after that is when Grainer got his statement.
Corporal Grainer, you are doing a fine job in Tier 1. As the NCOIC of the MI hold area, you have received many accolades from MI units here, and specifically from Lieutenant Colonel Jordan. Continue to perform at this level, and it will help us succeed at our overall mission. There's your verification that you know, as odd and uncomfortable as the situation may be, it's what you're supposed to be doing.
This commendation happened after most of the things pictured in the photographs that have become so notorious had already happened. And it simply beggars belief that military intelligence, working very closely with these people every day, simply was completely ignorant about what was going on this tier, which after all held all of their valuable prisoners.
When I'd pick up detainees to go to jail, they would motion towards the side where there was a cedar building. It was like the interrogation booths. And they'd look at it and say, no, mister, and point over there, and they'd act like they were sore, and I'm like, no, I don't take you over there. We're going to court to see the judge. Thank you, mister, I hurt. So it's one of those things where, what are they doing to these guys?
والله أنا كان همي كله كان على أبوي. أبوي أخذوه يعني هو بقى يمكن شهر أو شهر ونص بالمعتقل. خلال هالفترة أخذوه يمكن 4 مرات. ياخذوا يحققون يجيبوا يجي منتي. مرة من المرات دا أسبحه والرجال ما يقدر يسبح نفسه. أخذت الحمام دا أسبحه. فنزعت ملابسه. شوف الظاهرة. توقع زرق. سألته قلت له أبوه شنو؟ قال ما أريد أحكي لك عوفة. يعني من التعذيب اللي ما أعذب هي. المهم ظلينا فترة من الفترات أبوي تمرض. أخذته ما أقدر أخذته لأن تمرض صار شوي من التعذيب وما شنو شوي صدره قام يضيق عليه بالنفس. فرحت على الأمريكي الموجود بالباب. قلت له أبوي مريض بالكتب تدزول على الدكتور بس يجي يشوفه يفحصه يشوف شنو هذا البي. الأمريكي يقول لي أرجع. التجي لا تجي أرجع ماك شيء. رجعنا الخيمة أبوي حالته صحيح قامت تسوء بعد أكثر. تسوء بعد أكثر وأكثر. وأتوسل بيهم والله العظيم أتوسل بيهم هذا الأمريكي والمترجم. كون تجيبوا له دكتور سألت له بدون المستشفى جيبوا له دكتور خليه يفحصه. آخر مرة سحب مسدس على البندقية عليه قال إذا ما ترجع راح أضربك. ارجع وعلى تراجع. فالتهب على أبوي صار بدنوب. قام حتى الوغف يطلع من الحلقة مال الوفاة قام يطلع وغف من الحلقة فحاطاني هنا على يديه. هو ذي شاهد لأن عرف بنفسه انتهى بعداي. طلعناه برا بالباب هو أنا على يدي منان أبوه على راسه يعني ما حتى عينه ما يقدر يفتحها. شيخ حط راسه ما راسه توفى.
كان أشد وقعا على المعتقلين أصوات المعتقلين الذين يعذبون. في ليلة جاءوا بشراشف أو بردات ووضعوها على الزنزانات لكي لا يرى أحد شيء، وبدأوا يعذبون بأحدهم وكنا نسمع ما يجري وكانت روحه تزهق ونحن نسمع. حقيقة صوته كان يأخذ لب العقول ويوقف القلوب. ثم علمنا بعد ذلك أن هذا الرجل كان مناضل الجميلي.
We have one clear case of someone who appears to have been tortured to death at Abu Ghraib, who was delivered, who was kept in ICE, who was off the records. He was a ghost detainee. Investigation conducted about this, tying this death to, as I recall, Navy SEALs and also CIA personnel. And, CIA, there seems to have been a policy decision not to prosecute homicides that resulted from this highly abusive conduct.
We came to the prison and we were told that a prisoner just died and he died of a heart attack. And he was in the shower and that was it. They weren't gonna come pick him up right away because they didn't have any means, and that he was in a body bag. So of course Sergeant Frederick and me were like, okay, it's just a dead body, right? He died of a heart attack. So we went in, and I believe Corporal Grainer took a photo of me. It was just a dead guy. It was supposed to be just a dead guy. And we didn't realize until after these photos that He was bleeding in places that you wouldn't bleed from getting a heart attack. Well, the thumbs up, I got that from the little kids. The smile, I always smile for cameras. It's just the natural thing you do when you're in front of a camera. It really wasn't anything negative towards this guy. Like, I didn't know he was just murdered. I just thought it was just, it's war, it's another dead guy, no big deal.
CIA put him on ice, and they were going to try to get him out on a stretcher with IVs to cover up a murder. But has anybody been brought to trial for that? No, but Grainer and Sabrina were charged with those pictures. That, to me, is ridiculous. We won't charge the murderer even though it's ruled a homicide, but we'll charge you for taking pictures and exposing that a murder happened here. I don't understand. There is a hole in this whole investigation. It's a black, dark hole that says cover-up.
So I wanted to take home pictures of Hilla, and because we had been some very astounding places. We'd seen the Tower of Babel, the city of Babylon, and we had been through a lot of history stuff that, you know, you read about in the Bible and in history books coming through Iraq. So I wanted that. I wanted pictures of that. I wanted pictures of things we'd experienced. And so I was asking everybody, hey, did you get any pictures of this? Did you get any pictures of that? And when I talked to Grainer that night, and I said, hey, man, I said, I know you're always taking pictures. I want to get some pictures off of you. Takes out 2 CDs and says, here, just come back to me when you get a chance. Probably 2 days later, I was looking at the pictures, and the first CD, it was all Hilla. You know, Babylon Palace, everything. Every place, you know, Camp Victory, the palaces we'd seen and everything. It was some good pictures. The second CD was everything dealing with the abuse. And I was like, oh my God, these are prisoners. And then, you know, what do I do now? I heard Ambiel's voice, I heard England's voice, I heard Grainer's voice. I didn't hear Frederick. I did hear Frederick's voice, and I heard Sivitz's voice. All 5 of them were outside of the room I was in. I heard all their voices. I'm like, oh my God. Chief Arthur comes in and goes, you're still here. I said, yeah, I'm still here. What are we gonna do? I've got them out here, he's in here, he can't get out the door. And finally, they went around and rounded up as many blankets as they could. And they had all of the 5 people stand up and turn around and face the other wall. Put blankets all over me. I mean, head to toe, covered in blankets. You couldn't see anything. I couldn't see anything. They were leading me. And they rushed me out past them, out the back door, and then pulled the blankets off and said, get out of here. And that's the last time I talked to CID about anything.
In the course of this investigation, when it first got started up in Iraq, they set up amnesty locations. And they told everybody assigned to Abu Ghraib, if you have any discs, if you have any photographs, if you have any contraband, you need to put it in the amnesty boxes now, and it will all be forgotten. Don't worry about private photos, don't worry about anything else that might be on the disc, but everything will be forgotten.
Okay, well, if anyone has any pictures of anything, destroy them now. It was a whole bunch of people erasing their hard drives, just destroying discs and CDs, things like that. Just like in fear of like, man, maybe if I took a picture of something, could I get in trouble for what I took a picture of?
This is a picture of an Iraqi prisoner of war, and according to the U.S. Army, Americans did this to him.
Torture, outrage. Arab TV networks plastering photos all over the airwaves today of U.S. troops apparently abusing Iraqi prisoners.
Images are sickening, and the outrage they are causing worldwide continues to grow.
About 6 months after I came back to the States, I walked into Best Buy's electronics store, and I'm looking at TVs, and I see my picture and picture of other MPs, and you're naked detainees in this. I was shocked, of course.
There was mortification. I'm on the news. There's life's going to be a little bit different from now on.
It was during the investigation that I saw them. I didn't know that they exist. I'm like, what is that? They're like, do you know anything about this? Like, no. Have you seen any? Did you take any of these pictures? I'm like, no.
The photographs came out while I was at Balad Air Base. The first time any of us knew that my name was out there was when Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld on national TV thanked me. And I'm supposed to be anonymous.
First Specialist Joseph Darby alerted the appropriate authorities that abuses were occurring.
I was scared to death. I was actually about 10 feet from the TV in the chow hall with 4 or 5 other soldiers that they all knew. These were the guys that I trusted. And one of them looked at me and he goes, Darb, we need to leave, and leave now.
Seven soldiers, all members of the military police, are facing charges of abusing Iraqis at the Abu Ghraib prison. From the very beginning, the military establishment has said this was the work of a few bad soldiers.
I shared a deep disgust that those prisoners were treated the way they were treated.
Those acts ought not to be allowed to define us. The terrible actions of a few don't change that.
Those soldiers let us down. They simply let us down.
The Defense Department has done numerous investigations, and they found what happened at Abu Ghraib was not authorized, that the people who conducted were not aware of whatever other thinking was being done with the law, and that this was essentially the activity of people on the night shift. It wasn't even in the context of interrogations. Every investigation that's been conducted so far has not found any kind of link.
Sir, we did not find any evidence of a policy or a direct order given to these soldiers to conduct what they did.
There was sadism on the night shift at Abu Ghraib, sadism that was certainly not authorized. It was kind of Animal House on the night shift.
Even suggesting that this was Animal House on the night shift was conscious disinformation. Is there any chance that these people were self-actuated, that they just came up with this as their own idea? No, there's no chance of that whatsoever. Zero chance. What they're doing are very precisely described techniques that were developed for use on Arab men in the global war on terror, were implemented at Guantanamo, and were then brought to and used in Abu Ghraib.
When you actually think about the Animal House on the night shift theory, you have a couple of problems. The big problem is that this actually is a practice that's well known to interrogators. It's called the Vietnam. It was developed in Brazil. It combines stress positions, which is to say standing on, balancing on a box, with electrocution, or in this case, the threat of electrocution, and sensory deprivation, the hood. So this practice is quite well known. How exactly are some uneducated prison guards, how exactly did they know to use this technique, which was developed by the Brazilian military?
I'd like to know what agencies or private contractors were in charge of interrogations. Did they have authority over the guards? And what were their instructions to the guards?
First, with respect to the...
We did not bring it.
Oh, my.
Yeah, oh, my is right.
It was all prepared.
It was, indeed. I'll walk through the chain of command and...
No, you can submit the chain of command, please. Secretary Rumsfeld, in all due respect, You've got to answer this question, and it could be satisfied with a phone call. This is a pretty simple, straightforward question.
Abu Ghraib is a great example of bureaucratic virtuosity in handling a scandal. None of these reports looked at the whole chain of command. There is this long chain that leads from what was done to prisoners in the cells up through military police to the military intelligence who ordered it on some occasions, back to the Pentagon, back to the White House eventually. You have this long chain, and until that whole chain is looked at in an authoritative way by someone who is empowered to ask questions of anyone, we won't, at the end of the day, know actually what happened at Abu Ghraib.
You know, the administration will say we've conducted hundreds of investigations into these things, and indeed they have. We don't have too few investigations, we got too many investigations. What we need is one investigation that is conducted by individuals that are absolutely bulletproof, who have been given the authority to go wherever they need to go. If it leads them to the E-ring of the Pentagon, so be it. If it leads them to the Oval Office, so be it.
Grainer and the 372nd MP Company embarrassed the Army with pictures. And the Army got them back.
Nothing would have happened to anybody if the photographs wouldn't have been out.
If there were no photographs, there would be no Abu Ghraib, there would have been no investigation. It'd have been, oh, okay, whatever, everybody go home.
These photographs from Abu Ghraib have come to define the United States. The U.S., which was viewed as certainly one of the principal advocates of human rights and the view of the dignity of human beings in the world, suddenly is viewed as a principal expositor of torture.
The United States used to be the model, but it is no longer. If we adopt cruel treatment, as some might want us to adopt, if we embrace torture as something that is expedient and necessary in the instance, we sacrifice a long-term interest. We sacrifice our belief in human rights. We sacrifice our belief in the rule of law and what law should govern and what law should prohibit. And we blur the distinction between ourselves and the terrorists. And I'm convinced it would be counterproductive in the war on terror.
At that moment, I was a different person. At that moment, I was not the person that you're sitting here talking to right now. At that moment, I was somebody else.
I'm trying to forget this. Not to bring back bad memories.
That it reminded me of Golding's Lord of the Flies. You know, that animalistic, that dark element in each of us is just brought out. It's just a matter of, you know, are the elements right?
Now, yeah, maybe I have some regrets about what went on there. Even though it wasn't necessarily a comfortable thing to do. I didn't.
The results, as I observe them in the laboratory, are disturbing. They raise the possibility that human nature cannot be counted on to insulate men from brutality and inhumane treatment at the direction of malevolent authority. A substantial proportion of people do what they are told to do, irrespective of the content of the act and without limitations of conscience, so long as they perceive that the command comes from a legitimate authority. If in this study, an anonymous experimenter could successfully command adults to subdue a 50-year-old man and force on him painful electric shocks against his protests, one can only wonder what government, with its vastly greater authority and prestige, can command of its subjects.